This is just a picture of the system. We have our solid doser, which can dose things with a high level of precision, and it does it autonomously, which means I don't have to stand there weighing out many different vials. We also have a decapper and recapper system right here, highlighted in orange, which can take the caps off of HPLC vials and put them back on. It's one of my favorite robotic movements to watch, and you'll be able to see it as well. And it involves the component number 3, which is a secondary robotic arm, which is right now used in the recapping and decapping workflow, but also is used to bring vials to our HPLC for data analysis. We have a solvent bank, which can fit up to about 10 solvents right now in varying volumes. We have vial holders, which can fit about 50 vials, HPLC vials in there. We have a temperature-controlled shaker, which can control the stirring rate, as well as how quickly and how slowly things can heat up or cool down, which is very useful when trying to control cooling rate in a crystallization. In previous iterations, we had a stir plate and a centrifuge, but we've since consolidated them into one, which we're bringing back onto the deck. And we also have push filters shown here, just if we want to do solubility measurements. So when we have these modular components, we can arrange them into workflows to try and access different experimental techniques. So shown here is a cooling crystallization, where we can first dose our solid, dose a solvent, bring that up to a certain temperature, sample and dilute that for analysis, and then using the controlled shaker, bring it down to a second temperature and repeat that data analysis to understand what's going on with the phase. And if we switch up the order of these modules on the deck, we can achieve a solubility measurement by using the push filters, or we can understand the impurity retention mechanism, so how an impurity might be incorporated into a solid mixture by understanding how it reacts when washed with different solvents. If you're interested in that, the previous master's student, Noah, has a whole thesis on that. And now for the fun part, let's watch the robot perform part of this crystallization. I'll be starting it on our Python script. And I'll just be verbally annotating what's going on at each step. It does take a little bit of time to set up, and this demo is about 10 minutes, so if you can come over around here to watch it as well. I would just say avoid this space because sometimes the Canova arm will do some movement. So right now it is picking up the closest clean vial, which is stored in a certain CSV file in our computer. So it's finding the first clean vial. Now it's going to take the cap off using our decapping workflow. Did we need the secondary robotic arm for that? No, yes, but it, yes, oh yeah, we did, yes. For the, yeah.
Work in the grant, absolutely necessary.
Yeah. Now it's gonna move it to the balance for dosing.
Older.
Yes. Yes.
Right now, it's something. So honestly, this is something we're working broadly with. Why this old school dude is actually a little bit more. Really old ones. We just bought a second one, and it doesn't work. And we're they will service the balance part and not going to be the thing. But we.
So this powder it's dosing is a lovely dry white powder straight from the bottle. It's just pure benzocaine, which I used in most of my solubility experiments. So it has no trouble dosing that, but the second it becomes a little bit sticky, it will just honk out. So we have to think about ways to dose slurries and dose, non-ideal mixtures.
I like your homegrown
I didn't make it. I think it was Matt who made it, but very useful. You made Noah design it? Is this what's going to happen in my future? Okay.
But ideally, you could start where your garbage is sitting for bundles. Rebecca says the problem is scrape crap out of a reactor. Does it flow cleanly? But again, liquid dose and rip down and get it back. Maybe.
Played with different hoppers. They have all the different dispensing. Those are the different things. I've yet to find one that works in this condition and doesn't work there. We bought them all and we just have an assortment in a drawer, and it's like we use this one because we got this.
It hasn't been.
I've got positive history.
Yes.
Punch it out.
Yeah. Oh, another. Don't really like.
It might end up being like toothpaste.
Well, no, you're eating like. Yes.
But it's hard to control.
It's like a large thing. Is it a commercial thing? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, the swile,
The
yeah.
swile is, but
They're silly, they're black.
they're still glass around. Used to be. Yeah. Robots are new. But, manual. Diameter.
Now it's going to be dosing the solvents. But first it's purging the needle with our backing solvent, THF, to make sure the lines are clear.
Where are the masses?
The masses are recorded in our Python script.
Are they okay?
Yeah, so right now it's all pre-coded. So I told it to dose 20 grams and it dosed 20 milligrams. It dosed 19.69.
That's good.
Yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Will it adjust
Is it like you're just getting
Yeah, so right now for this one, we're adding methanol and water. So benzocaine is very insoluble in water, very soluble in methanol. So through a bit of testing, you have to add the methanol, then the water, or else we get different results. But when we heat it up to the high temperature, everything is dissolved. And so it doesn't really matter for this case at this scale.
Will it adjust the solvent volumes based on the mass?
Right now, this is hard coded, but in a actual like optimization campaign, what I've done is I've built solubility curves for each of the solids that I'm using and all the solvents at the various temperatures and solvent compositions, which is a lot of data points. But yeah, and then I fit it into a solubility modeling script, which I made on Python. So it will fit it to various different solubility curves. And then based on which one has the highest R squared value, it will choose that one and then use that to model. So yeah, essentially, yes, we can get it to update the masses based on the updated. No, I use clean solid, clean solvent, and I use the push filter vials. So I'll bring them up to a temperature and then, actually I don't do it, the robot does it all, which makes it better. And then it will, yeah, heat it up, push it down, like, so filter it and then sample dilute it. Mm. Interesting.
Or it increases it. With one product that had alcohol in it, and it was actually with structure until we got it, but equivalent amount of one equivalent is actually
Hmm.
crystallized, versus we developed the acetone water one about maybe 2 years.
Wow.
So like, but if you had like one equivalent of that, so it's, I mean, there are all these weird things. I always like after solvent, I would always try to look at molecular solubility.
Yeah. Yeah. For the solubility curve, essentially the goal was to just be able to roughly ballpark how much mass to add at the high temperature. So I'm not like way over where I'll still have solid dissolve, but I'm also not way under such that my yield will be, my reported yield will be messed up. But that's a good thing to know.
Is there a goal to have it solubilized so go
Yeah.
goal to-
Yeah. For cooling crystallization. So it's going to move it to the shaker and shake up to 37. And while it's doing that, there's nothing to watch. So I'll be talking about past data that I obtained and sort of how we get, choose our inputs and outputs and what data we can get.
Are we get
Why
target?
That's how, why.
Why does it shake when it puts it in? Yep.
Go. So we just average.
We also just like to see it move a bit more. It's more interesting. Yeah.
We have no way of.
No, because we have a function where it will reset the shaker to base position. And so, yeah. So now it's going to stir for a couple minutes. And while it does that, I'll just quickly mention our, yes.
So that you parallelize work.
Put more solid in. Yeah. I have heard that parallelization is very difficult, and I learned Python as of September. So down the line, it would be something interesting to add. But right now, my general workday would be I would set this up and then go home overnight. So for me, right now, it doesn't really matter whether or not it takes 20 minutes to set up a crystallization or like 10. So yeah, but that's a good thing to keep in mind. All right. So I'll just talk about briefly what goes into a crystallization campaign for us right now when I'm trying to optimize that. So for the data that I'll be showing, we had 4 different inputs. All of these are continuous numerical variables. So the temperature difference, the range of temperature we're looking at, the low temperature to which it can cool down all the way to, the solvent ratio between 2 binary solvents, and then the cooling rate, so the rate at which it cools down. And then the outputs we were looking for this crystallization were the yield, the purity, and the impurity rejection. And how we obtain this data is through HPLC. Essentially, what we'll see is we'll see the robot taking a sample at the high temperature, which when it goes through the HPLC, we'll be able to see, this is obviously a beautiful example of just the solution composition at the high temperature. So we see it has about 100 units, but after we cool it down, we'll be able to just look at the solution phase, and then using that and comparing it to what it was at the high temperature, we can infer what the solid phase is. And then using this, we'll be able to understand what our yield is, what our purity is, and how much impurity was rejected from the overall solid. So these are relatively simple calculations. So it's not looking at necessarily the actual crystal structure or like, yeah, polymorphs or anything like that, but it's just sort of a rough idea and sort of a place to start. Yeah, we're not looking at polymorphs at all. We're just sort of like, what is our yield? What is our purity? We're just doing, what was it before? What was it after? Sort of a yield of what's still in
Think about it stepwise. I mean, again, this. Interested about linear for that also helps.
Mm. Hmm.
High level, lower level.
Mhm.
Show background of it.
I see. So like sampling it in multiple different temperatures along the crystallization.
There's that actually. So the other one, that's a good, that's important. The other one I would just
Okay.
So that would be the at something like 0.1%, 0.5%, curve or not. Again, it's probably more specific, very common, but
Mhm.
generally, value a single point. Yeah,
Want
Yeah.
are equal amounts as the picture is showing here, where it's like,
yeah.
it's pretty easy to crystallize.
Yeah.
That's the major.
Yeah. Okay, this is very good to think about.
I had it.
Yeah.
Heat agent once you the desired temperature.
Yeah.
Cooling rate, right? But
Yeah.
then
So how long do we let it?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So for this demo, it's 7 minutes. But during a normal crystallization, we do it for 2 hours, just shaking. But I didn't want to put you all through that, watching it shake. We do sample at the high temperature. So how it will work is it will bring it up to the high temperature, and then on a normal crystallization, we'll leave it for 2 hours, and then we'll let it settle at the high temperature for 6 minutes or so, just something that we've hard coded in, which would be great to include vision on, so we don't have to guess to wait how long things settle. But then once we assume solids have settled, we'll sample that and then dilute that, and then we'll start cooling it down to the other temperature, and then we'll also keep that at the low temperature for 2 hours before doing the same iterative process. Yeah. We will be showing the sampling. It will do that in probably 2 or 3 minutes. It will sample and then we'll move it to the HPLC. Oh yes. That's actually a big pain when I'm doing solubility curves, because sometimes I'll be measuring things up at really high temperatures and it'll be like, oh, 46 milligrams is dissolved, and then the needle is not temperature controlled. So it will be just plugged in the needle and it will take me a long time to unclog it.
Sometimes we've thought about just like dipping it in a hot liquid first, like just solve it
For
get it
some
all
time.
heated up, or cool.
Yeah.
And then sample so your
That
needle's
is
like
smart.
kind of free.
Oh, that is very smart.
The other variation would be the way the plate's designed. And filters have in the past also, closed purge and filter. So depending on the material, in some cases, you can actually go up. Instead of gravity, hot sample, filter, you can imagine sacrifice that whole vial to get it. So we have a couple of taking it through something.
From out. Salt.
All good points. So this is, I'll just throw some data on the first project that I did. Pyrothroic acid, this is not the actual structure of the molecule that we were working with, but this is a derivative of jasmine 2, which is from the chrysanthemum flower, which is always great to always have to pronounce in presentations. And what we were separating was just a minor from a major isomer, and you can see that it is relatively pure to begin with. I might just stop talking while it's doing its thing there. I think it takes its time. Okay. So have we all seen topographical front? We know how to read them, more or less? Okay, great. So I'll just show the data then. This is when looking at single point impurity rejection over time. Oh, it's moving. Yes, it's drawing up a very small amount of solid or solvent, and then it will dispense it into a vial with backing solvent. We're using THF as our backing solvent to dilute everything. Oh, for this? Yeah, so when it shakes, it stops. We have a function that says reset to base position. So it will always push back this shaker to the back corner. And then it will, and we pre-programmed where it is. Yeah, there's some little notches here.
You're not.
Hmm.
You can actually stand, we'll have to.
Well, we don't do it. They do it.
It's fine. You know what? It's only ever happened once where I come back. Sometimes it will go wrong during the middle of the night, and it's like come back and it's like trying to solve a mystery. Like, where did it go wrong? But yeah, it's like the samples. I do have a live feed, and no, I don't.
That same webcam, basically, so that I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and been like, I have 5 vials sitting here, but based on the footage, I can figure out exactly what vial came from which position after watching it drop each one. So it works, and I've gotten the data back.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth a 7-day subscription to.
It is Amcrest. Yeah. So this is just a graph of some data that I got. The black points or the darker points are experiments that we ran and the data points resulting from it. So shown here in dark green is the maximum, where if you use the conditions along this line, then you'll be able to achieve the highest impurity rejection, which is what we were trying to maximize as one of our variables. What I also found very interesting is that these striations are just demonstrating the steepness of it. Now it's going to move it to the HPLC, which is very fun to watch. We're using Axe through Meta. It's like open source Bayesian optimization software. So it's not necessarily designed for chemistry, but it's free. So that's what we're using at first. This is always the most stressful thing to code because every once in a while this robotic arm will forget its locations and then you just hear the snap and you're like, no, not by the HPLC. I'm just gonna stop the Python script now.
How does it do with like last files?
It does. It does. That was actually something I had to bring up in subgroup once. I was like, you know what? We're only going to rewash the vials like a certain amount of times or else they get too brittle and then they start like cracking. And then I come back the next day and I'm like, well, I know where it failed last night. So, I am not for this one. I think will capital, I think it's 2 pounds. I'm not sure. It's a lot of force, but it does often, like usually for push filter vials, it will just like, oh, can't do this, and then it will stop. But yeah, I think we do need a lot of force for when we're pushing down the vials, but then it gets a bit too much, and then we'll have a protected stop on it. Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't. If you're picking up something solid, like we're exploring with having mobile stuff on deck, so especially within range of an arm. Limited by we have one arm. We want to have this many different things. It can't reach them all. Starting at the edges where it could be picking up something and moving it around, but it's a lot too strong to break on that.
All right, so I just stopped the robotic workflow because others will be using the same deck and we don't need it to be going for the whole time. But just, yeah, some data we got from this is that if you deviate from this point, you are going to be losing out on impurity rejection, and there's going to be quite a steep drop off from this ideal point. And then this was one of my favorite graphs from my undergrad thesis, and this is showing yield with respect to solvent ratio and temperature difference. And what I find cool is that it needs to be validated with more experimental data points, but we see this emergence of two maxima, so you can achieve the same yield with two different combinations of variables. And then using this, you can look at other things such as like the safety of the solvents you're working with, or maybe the efficiency of your process. Maybe you don't want to do such a large temperature difference if you can achieve the same results with just a different solvent ratio, or if you want to consider cost, maybe one of your solvents is a lot more expensive. So just downstream effects such as that. And with that, my demo's over. Any questions or comments? Appreciate it.
My name is Ivory. I'm the software developer of the High Lab. So I will introduce the Ivory OS, which is a interoperable software for SDLs. Because normally when we will love more people to interact with this platform, it's very challenging. Like what Rebecca showed you, we have to open up the code editor and say, this is the file you could run, and here are the couple of parameters you can edit. But there are like a ton of Python file in one project, and there are also like hundreds of lines of code where it's very hard to navigate that file when you run this again. But at the same time, if you wanted to design your own workflow, it's almost impossible. So, and another challenging that we're facing is because everything is modular, flexible, and you probably could already see there's a change comparing to this picture that was like only taken a couple of months ago. So in this case, we're having a hardware upgrade, but there could be like many other reasons that caused us hardware swap. So here we're trying to propose this like dynamic function inspection approach, where we look at the current Python scripts and then find what are the current modules being initialized, and then update the function panel accordingly by just inspecting what are the functions, what are their parameters that you need for the inputs. And in case of any changes for a different setup, since this will inspect the function every single time, it will adjust the function panel accordingly. So you can design the platform the way you want and then change it anytime. But every time you're ready to share this to other people, then you could have a platform that's like ready to use. So in this case, like we could browse through the functions and then actually design our own workflow by changing the building blocks orders. Then, but sometimes there's a disassociation with what you want to do as a chemistry task with like what's the function name. So we introduce like the use of AI. So for example, I want to mix my sample, and since we already inspect the functions, we could do, for example, add solid, add liquid, and shake. And we're gonna ask the large language model, so help me identify the most appropriate function to use, and then write me the Python code. So in this case, well, it's pretty obvious that it's a shake function, but when it's getting more complicated, there's more function to use, it's getting more handy. So, so for example, you can actually design with natural language, then have it converted to your actual workflow in the Canvas. So for control, we have like simple, just like repeat or run this experiment where we have high throughput configurations. And for the actual self-driving part, we're using the X platform as the backend because, well, this is swappable in the future, but for now it's good for Rebecca's experiment. So we're just keep this for now. So in this case, like the SDL function, they can change. You can have your own way of programming this, but the general user experience of controlling this robot, it's the same. So I will show you a quick demo. So just like what I had for demoing, like shaking a vial. So in this case, this is just a simple demo case. We have three functions, like move the vial to the shaker and shake it for a certain amount of time and then bring it back. So over the text to code area, I can say this is what I want to do for the experiments. Then I can generate the design canvas. So it actually says like move file to tray, shake it for 10 seconds and move it back. So I then can click compile and run. And let's just run this for one time oh, think I got it. Wow, yeah, it should be printed to the shaker. But this is the beauty of how we could visualize this. So in case that's like, oh, this shouldn't be file to tray, this should be file to shaker first, then we can like toggle the action and then make it actually correct. So, well, you don't have to fully trust the large language model because everyone just uses a tool. No one would trust that for important stuff. So like when it comes to like the actual experiments, we could do like, so for example, in a cooling crystallization, we could design this experiment in a like natural language way. Then we could say, oh, this is too tiny to see, but it's like the temperature difference being 35, low temperature is 12. We can describe this experiment and have it to generate a so it'll take a while because, well, so it's getting more useful for this case because there are a lot of like other functions that you have to navigate which is the correct one to use. So in this case, it will find that, oh, it's the cooling crystal, and then throwing out those parameters based on your natural language inputs. So in this case, we could actually rerun Rebecca's workflow by just saying like, oh, run this one more time, and it should be ready to go, picking up the available file. This is the same workflow for what Rebecca showed. But yeah, it's like you don't have to physically program in Python to be able to do the thing. So this is like, again, like it won't guarantee that the script's like safe to run. It will write up something for you, but it won't guarantee. But Lucy will show you like what is our current approach of making the platform that's actually safe to use. Like it will write the function that's like actually like guaranteed that it's safe to run. So Lucy will explain you more about our current approach.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I'm Lucy.
Oh, thank you, by the way.
I'm Lucy. I'm an undergrad research assistant that joined 3 months ago. I've been working under Ivory, so my continuation is kind of related to her work as well. Yeah, so we're interested in interoperability between different platforms. There's been a large rise of using language models to plan experiments, from directly writing the code, just like planning an experiment on a deck, because chemists don't want to write Python. They just want to, do chemistry. However, language models right now don't actually know how to reason, and they're just generating the most statistically correct choice of words. So if you say, do not ever overfill a vial, there's no guarantee that constraint won't be violated. So a way to like deal with these constraints that every self-driving lab has to ensure safety, and especially with robotic arms, there's a lot of potential for an arm to go flying somewhere and hit someone or crash a vial, is to represent a chemical procedure in a intermediate symbolic form. And once you're able to, represent a procedure in a symbolic form, then a computer algorithm can take that problem you have and find the steps for you. So for instance, a liquid handler seems pretty simple to operate, but when you're moving it around, you want to make sure the needle is never lowered, because if the needle is lowered, you could accidentally hit this. So if you set this as a constraint, if you just give that to the language model, it won't necessarily respect it. But if you represent it in an algorithm and ask a deterministic algorithm to generate steps for you, it will always respect that constraint. So how do you use AI to help you plan experimental procedure? So we kind of use language models and classical planners. And classical planners are a form of like really simple AI from like the 1980s, 1900s, and they've been used a lot in computer science. And combine that with the language model. So the good thing about large language models is they can deal with unstructured input. to convert some English prompt into a symbolic form. And the symbolic form is something like this predicate, and a predicate is like a declarative way of saying something you want. So it says liquid added to glassware, but you don't specify how this is achieved. And that is what's accomplished by the classical planner, which then returns a sequence of steps. And then we can turn those steps into any programming language and into any sort of lower level functions. So in this case, a lot of the self-driving labs here use Python, and we can then generate Python code from whatever the planner gives you. So you see from this simple predicate, there's actually a few steps you have to take to end up with a vial with liquid. So this is like kind of another like way to look at it, is that you have this task, the language model changes it into a predicate, and then these are all the constraints a liquid handler or liquid handling must follow. So for instance, it needs to be held by the arm to dose. You don't want it dosing like out of nowhere. You can only move it when the needle's retracted. You should only dose the proper solvent. So you're able to represent like the state of the liquid handler, like what type of chemical does it have? Does it even have enough chemical? And finally, there's other constraints like vials. You should never overfill a vial. So then taking these constraints, the planner will then generate these explicit actions. And there's a lot of things to check, but if you let a computer algorithm handle this, you don't have to think about, is the handler moving safely? Is the handler even filled? We'll make sure the handler doesn't overfill the vial. And that's the good thing about computer algorithms. They're good at following rules, but we have to be able to turn a chemical procedure into a symbolic format so that the computer can apply like rules. So how can this like increase interoperability? So we only need to develop these lower level Python functions once. And because there's like a lower level and a higher level, the higher level actions can remain the same and can swap out different pieces of hardware as long as the Python implementation exists for them. So for instance, our deck has 2 different arms, but they all follow a similar way of moving around. They might have different joints, but all of that logic would be in the Python code. And then we have 3 different liquid handlers here. All these handlers all have a needle that have to be in a safe position before moving. And then how that safe position is actually achieved would be in a low level of Python. So I'm just going to do a demo where I'll generate a program from a prompt, and then I'll just run that on this deck. It'll be a really simple demo. It's just a file filling. So I generate the program on my computer here. I will move here. I don't know if it's, I guess, yeah, there's 2 screens. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to copy this prompt right here, and it's going to output the Python script in a file called experiment demo August 5th. So I'm going to run this, and this is right now using ChatGPT, but this works with open source models like Llama and Mistral. So I'll paste in the prompt, and there's a few like different prompts it goes through. It's an iterative process, and you can see it picks this prompt, which is correct. But there's another prompt step where it will evaluate these predicates with a different model. So you can combine different language models to evaluate this symbolic form that's outputted. So first it's generated what it thinks is a good set of predicates for this task. And the second prompt decided that this predicate is the correct one. And then we can see this is the classical planner now of finding the actions, and all these steps are the explicit actions. I should have figured out how to zoom in, but we can see that there's a lot of these actions that are like moving the arm around, picking things up, drawing liquid, retracting the handler, that have to occur before you end up with a vial that has filled liquid. And now I'll just run it on this deck. So I'll have to go to this computer to run it. So this was the same script as that one. And another added bonus is that because we change it to a symbolic form, the symbolic form is deterministic. So even if the original prompt was set in a different way, when you end up at the same symbolic form, the computer algorithm will generate the same thing always. I think the handler has to be So this handler won't actually be dosing anything because we have another demo after that will actually dose liquid. Yeah, so it's obviously ongoing, and there's the reliability of the hardware plays a huge part because this robot is a little shaky. Little differences in the location can make things not fit perfectly together, and a lot of chemical equipment have such precise locations. That's like another area of research that should be, you know, found applied in self-driving labs. That is the end of my demo. I hope I didn't scare everyone, but yeah, if you have any questions.
Hello, everyone. Let me introduce you to our next project, which is devoted to automated liquid extraction. Liquid extraction is one of the most important post-reaction process in operations. It's one of the key operations for purification of your material, especially like in pharma industry. So crystallization and liquid extraction are one of the most reliable and important. But in the same time, I believe in your like experimentalist life, you definitely met this problem where you do the liquid extraction and something definitely goes wrong. You either have a emulsion formation or your product went into the wrong phase. Like, I think everyone who worked in the lab at some point and performed liquid extraction likely struggled with that situation. So liquid extraction is very complex and process which relies on multiple variables and can be affected by like a lot of different factors. So it's very time and labor consuming to troubleshoot it. And there is no actually quick and reliable method to do it because it relies on expertise of the chemists. However, even with expert chemists, it might take significant amounts of time just because you not necessarily always know how the liquid extraction mixture would behave. So the problem that we're trying to address with this project is to make a automated workflow which is capable of optimization of troubleshooting of liquid extraction. The idea is to make not a platform and not only a piece of hardware, but the workflow itself that can significantly speed up the whole process and can be used on a different hardware setups. In order to do that, we're planning to use already developed in the group capabilities such as parallelized experimentation so that we can do several actions of the workflow in parallel, and flexible automation. As you see in previous platforms, there is like set of modules which you can reorganize and use it for a different workflow. So as you've seen on Rebecca's platform, some of the modules that she used, we're also going to use in this project as well, which helps us, like we don't need to do extra development. We can just take already existed setup and adjust it for our new workflow. Another thing that we're aiming to use are online analytical techniques. The group developed a huge expertise in using HPLCs, a benchtop NMR, IR flow, IR, to analyze reaction mixture. The main approach that we will rely at the very beginning of the project is using HPLC for analysis of phase of different phases. But in the future, we're planning to involve more analytical techniques. And the very important part of liquid extraction troubleshooting is necessity of computer vision. Because as a chemist, when we do liquid extraction, we rely a lot on visual cues. So we still look, did the phase separation happen or not? And in this sense, we will need a reliable computer vision model and a way to approach it. And luckily, we have already expertise developed in this direction as well. We have a system called Hindsight, which I will tell you a little bit more in details later. And another important part is autonomous decision making. So, okay, we have all these visual cues, and how are we going to deal with that? So, if we see that there is no phase split, what are we going to do? And this whole process has to be encoded as well. This project is at the very beginning, so we started relatively recently, and it's aimed to be a 2-year project with one of our industrial partners. So the industrial partners mainly provides us with potential test cases and funding, and rest of the capabilities outsourced to our self-driving lab as a part of acceleration consortium. Since, as I say, like it's a project on the beginning stages, we try not only to develop the hardware pieces and the workflow, but also define this liquid-liquid extraction space. In order to do that, we identified 3 types of workflows connected to not only to liquid-liquid extraction, but to preparation of reaction mixture for liquid-liquid extraction. So, for instance, for workflow 1, we have this reaction in some reaction solvent, solvent 1, and prior to liquid-liquid extraction, we want to remove solvent 1 with using rotary evaporator or any other techniques to evaporate the solvent, and then replace it with extraction solvent in aqueous phase. And then during extraction, we have our product in solvent 2, and our like everything that we don't need goes to aqueous phase. Another version of it might be where our reaction solvent, solvent 1, doesn't bother us, doesn't not affect the extraction in the end. So we can just directly add extraction solvents and aqueous solution and perform a liquid-liquid extraction, which means it does not involve any operations in preparation for liquid-liquid extraction. And in the end, we get a similar outcome. And the difference between those two, that, for instance, in the sense of workflow 1, if you will not fully remove your solvent, reaction solvent, then you can end up with emulsion formation, or your product will, if this solvent 1 miscible with aqueous phase, your product will likely go to aqueous phase. So you will have lower yields and conversion. And another case, another approach which can also happen is when your reaction solvent is some compounding solvent, such as DMF or DMSO, which is really hard to get rid of from reaction mixture. So in order to get your product, you would have to add some other organic solvent for extraction, solvent 2, at the aqueous phase. And during liquid-liquid extraction, your product would go with your extraction solvent, but then you need to do extra washes to remove this miscible DMF, DMSO from the reaction mixture. Otherwise, you would also face the consequences of likely your product going to aqueous phase. And having these 3 workflows not only helps us to identify preparation for liquid-liquid extraction, but also helps chemists to systematize the like knowledge of test cases, because except we're trying to define this chemical space with problems for liquid-liquid extraction, which means we are building a database of challenging liquid-liquid extraction cases. And when you ask chemists, like using these workflows, it helps to systematize the knowledge and easier come up with the different examples. And actually, we can really appreciate your help. And if you, in your practice, met any problematic liquid-liquid extractions, we would really appreciate if you can share it with us, so that we can have as many as a representative base and database as possible. And I will, if you have any, I will follow up with you later, but the help would be really appreciated. And also, using this workflow, we can map our chemical space and make like a landscape to see the crossover between these different workflows and the challenges that arise during the liquid-liquid extraction, such as, like, for instance, impurity rejection problems or rag layer formation. So we can see, first of all, what problems are the most common for what workflow. And secondly, we can also map our individual examples on this surface. If we would have some specific test case, we can see what workflow it fits to, and then also what challenges actually arise, and are they the same as we expected? Because as I said, like there might be some common challenges for specific workflows, but not necessarily. And it still will be very individual in every case. And after we have this like chemical space regarding liquid extraction, we also started to look in parallel with that, we started to look into workflow. And this is the current workflow that we're aiming to use. It's based on the existing workflow from our industry partners. And the procedure is as follows. You would have a liquid extraction vial where you pre-fill it with water and organic solvent. Then you dose their reaction aliquot and stir mixture for some time to get a homogeneous mixture to ensure proper extraction. Then you stop stirring, wait for phase split, take pictures. That's where computer vision capabilities coming in. In the meantime, in parallel, you can pre-weight smaller vial and charge it with internal standard, because we're planning to use internal standard to ensure that the results of our HPLC analysis are correct. So we have vials, we pre-weight their internal standard, and we add but liquid extraction aliquots from organic and from aqueous phase into separate vials. And then we weight vials again to measure density of the liquid in there. And after that, we can dilute aliquots and analyze it with HPLC to see what's the composition, where is the product, where are the impurities. And to start with, we decided to start with one of the test examples that we came up ourselves, which is relatively simple amine group protection. But at the same time, the issue here that might be that the product could be soluble in both phases. So we need to carefully monitor and actually optimize liquid extraction process to ensure that the product, full recovery of the product. And on this moment, let me show you a little demo on this RoboDeck. So as I said, the project is at the very beginning, so it won't be the full workflow, but it's one sample on how it could be done, what operations and how we can execute at the moment. Yeah, first of all, we will just start the script. And the idea, we have already in the vial these two phases, aqueous and organic, and we stir it for some time. In the meantime, we can see how our liquid handler is priming the lines to ensure that all the lines are clean and ready to go. We use this mobile liquid handler called Salsa, which is very convenient in a sense. That's like a very important capability that we're gonna use, that since it's so mobile, we can adjust height, how deep it goes into reaction vial. So we can sample each phase individually. We can get sample from aqueous phase and we can get sample from organic phase. And yeah, so once phases are separated, that's what we do. And each sample we move to a to a smaller vial for HPLC. Interestingly enough, this liquid handler is already diluting, like once before it takes a sample, it fills the syringe with baking solvent, which is our HPLC solvent, and then it withdraws the sample from the vial, which means sample will be already diluted for HPLC and there is no need for any extra step. Right now, this procedure is fairly simplified, and of course, a bit later when it will be like executed as a part of workflow, we will also encompass cleaning procedure between steps to clean the needle, because yes, of course, we foresee that there might be some contamination when you sample different phases. And after samples are prepped, a robot can move them into HPLC and then start HPLC run, and later with the previously developed Python script, we can gather all the HPLC data, retention time, peak area, and based on that, make conclusions on how well did our extraction go. And Another important part that I wanted to tell you about is computer vision. I will not show you setup today, but we have a talk as a part of the conference, and you can get more information about it there. But we previously, in the group, we previously already developed a computer vision setup, which was tested for liquid extraction cases. It is capable of analyzing up to 12 samples in parallel. We are not sure at this moment that as a part of our workflow, we will need to analyze multiple samples at once, because we also rely on HPLC, and HPLC can process only one sample, and it takes a few times, so likely we not even need the capability of checking different vessels at the same time. However, it's nice to have, and if we'll also make any changes to our workflow, it can be used later. The benefit here is that except analyzing different vessels, we can also look into different visual cues. We can check turbidity, we can check is the phase homogeneous, heterogeneous, is there any precipitates or anything. And important here is to have even lightning, which will be a challenge, but we're looking to address it further developing the platform. And yeah, as I said, like more details on that you can find in one of our talks during the conference. And let me know if you have any questions. And I think that's the end for this project for now. This is the current state where we're at, and we're aiming for more development in the future. So probably our next meetings, I can give you more updates on that. Thank you.
Hello, today I would like to talk about the automatic deck that I've built, and we will quickly go through the components that it has from left to right. On the left side we can see a custom built liquid handler. It was a 3D printer before, and we customized it to be one of our pipetting tools. Then we have the UR3 arm that is used to move everything around that needs to be moved, like vials and a sampler that we'll get to in a second. There's the Integrity 10 block that is used for temperature control and steering. We have HPLC access in the back in yellow, where we have an Agilent needle seat where we can inject our samples that are then brought to the HPLC for analysis. And then we have the custom capping station that is used to uncap or recap vials for the solid dosing step on the XPR balance with a powder dosing unit. And lastly, the most interesting design in my opinion is the SALSA standalone sampling assembly, which is a battery-powered sampling device that has no tubing or wires connected to anything stationary on the deck, so that the arm can just pick it up and move it anywhere we want without entangling any cables. And this kind of modularity allows for a lot of different workflows. For example, one thing you wouldn't necessarily expect this thing to handle is calibration curves. But since calibration curves are just a matter of portion-wise addition and sampling multiple times to get replicates for each concentrations, this deck can create these calibration curves with a high accuracy. And I want to highlight this accuracy with the figure on the right here, where we can see I ran 2 reactions. Whatever this reaction is, I will show you guys later. I ran the reaction twice with the same concentration, same everything, and you can see that the 2 time curves that I got for the starting material in blue and the product in green overlap really nicely. So I use these customizable workflows and the high accuracy data and the high data rate that I get to get kinetic data curves for the reaction that I run. However, what makes this deck really interesting is the fact that we can do conditional workflows. And by that, I mean the ability to run reactions that we have not anticipated in the first place. A simple example would be if we observe a really low order in catalyst, like 0 order, the system can recognize that as something that is unusual and just go back to the original procedure and keep lowering the catalyst concentration until you find the point where the catalyst actually shows the expected order of 1. And we use this ability of conditional workflows to do accelerated stress testing. First of all, what exactly is stress testing? It's about finding the worst performance for a certain reaction. So screening the entire hypersurface for all the points that a reaction can break. That is very different from a normal optimization where you also screen the hypersurface, but you're just looking for the one best point. Here with the stress testing, you have to find all points where the system breaks. Because otherwise, yeah, you avoided catalyst deactivation, but your reactor blew up because there was an exothermic side reaction, which is obviously not what we want. So the stress testing is about telling you how bad can it get before your entire reaction system breaks. Now, what is the accelerated doing in this title? First of all, the system is of course accelerated by automation, but that is what the entire conference is about, so I will not go into detail here. The point that I want to highlight here again is that the system can act on conditionals, as it has access to all concentrations and everything that is happening. That means if something is not as you would expect, the system can go by itself and investigate that behavior. For example, if your EE gets diminished by water in the reaction, the system can go back and figure out how much water exactly do you need before your enantiomeric excess is below the threshold that you need. And now you will see a quick live demonstration on how the deck works. And the idea is that it can kind of mimic what a chemist would do, like a kineticist, how you would perform the different reactions. For example, right now it will add the last chemical to the reaction that will start it. We'll also get into what the chemistry is, but it's more focused on the deck here. We'll add the last chemical that will start the reaction. And how a chemist would do it, a chemist would take the chemical, chuck it in, and then just sample as fast as possible to get like a time zero. And that is also what this deck is going to do here in some form. The delay here is about 30 seconds, what you will see, which is totally fine because the total reaction goes for 5 to 6 hours currently. So that doesn't need to be more optimized. Right now, the liquid handler has aspirated the chemical to start the reaction with. And it's now going to inject that last chemical. Before we inject it, we're going to get the sampling device, the salsa, here with a robotic arm, and move it over to the vial so that we don't waste any time on that step after we started the reaction. Now the needle went down and it is injecting the chemical to start the reaction with. What you're going to see then is that after the needle comes up, the liquid handler will move to the side just a tiny bit, not all the way, so that it can hold down the vial. Because if the needle on the salsa pierces the septum on the vial and there's nothing to hold the vial down, the salsa will just pull the entire vial up and that would crash the system. Now that we've taken our sample, salsa brings it over to the injector port, from where it gets injected into the HPLC, and that gets evaluated automatically. Another thing that it does after the HPLC ran is it will send me live updates on my Slack bot here. You can see here, so here this is the setup while you guys were doing the other presentations. It will keep track of what is added to it, what is the current concentration, which is really nice for backtracking problems. For this specific run, I've set it up that when the starting material is fully consumed, it will increase the temperature of the reaction to facilitate the next step. But since the reaction takes 6 hours and we don't have that much time, I will simply swap the reaction with a vial that only has solvents in it. And the reaction that is currently running is this guy. It's copper catalyzed oxidation, and then the aldehyde that we get reacts with an amine into the imine. And the test we've done so far is 2 different starting materials. And you can already see that there's a huge difference in how these starting materials behave. So this is generally a way to screen reactions for different starting materials, get really good time course data, even if you don't really know anything about the reaction. We didn't know how long it would take. It's just endpoint determined sampling in this case. So the way this worked is it just takes the standard deviation of the thing that we defined as a product, and if that goes to a certain threshold, it will just stop the reaction. So you can see both reactions here stopped at the correct time, and we don't really need to know how long does the reaction take. It will just determine that by itself. The other HPLC run will take another 3-4 minutes, I think. And while we wait for that, I want to discuss a bit more on what the deck can do and what I did already with it. So another reaction I ran is this sharpless, it's not sharpless, the dehydroxylation that is osmium catalyzed, because we don't have the ligand in there, so it's not chiral yet. Basically, I ran this reaction a lot of times, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes I observed these kind of weird profiles where the HPLC system clogged, and it took a long time to unclog it, so I wanted to know why did that happen. And the order of addition here matters a lot, because the catalyst itself is completely insoluble. The osmium catalyst is completely insoluble in the solvent that we chose. But in the oxidized form, the osmium tetroxide is soluble. So if you have to solid dose first, and then in an optimal case you have to add the NMO next. But I only figured that out through the order of addition experiments because my HPLC kept clogging more constantly when I added the NMO last, or yeah, when I started the reaction with it basically, because then there was the maximum amount of particles around. And that also allowed me to set up another experiment that was more of an informed test, where I told the system, okay, the osmium needs some time to dissolve, how much time do I have to give it? So that my HPLC clogs less. It wasn't always, I couldn't fully reproduce it, which was really annoying. And so I couldn't really choose that as a property to optimize for. What I instead did was I optimized the initial rate, because when more osmium is dissolved, the rate should be higher. And having access to the concentrations at all times allows you to do these kinds of things. So this is basically the final result here, where we have no waiting period, and it fully went through with sampling. And here, around 2000 seconds, it maximized the rate that you can see here. It just compared the first point to, I think, the fifth is what I chose, and I just wanted to know, like, where does it maximize? Where do I don't get any more benefit from waiting longer? And the system just fully optimized that by itself. I basically just checked for this condition every time and increased the waiting period. I think I doubled it or something like that every time it didn't work, and that is what the system came up with, basically by itself, just telling it, okay, I need to know this. Back to the practical demonstration. Right now it's going to start the second sampling step from the vial that only has solvent in it, since we want to fake the alcohol concentration being 0. Since that is what we have chosen to be our conditional in this case, as it is easy to set up and also easy to control for by just checking the HPLC spectrum. And the process is roughly the same, except that we're now sampling from the main reaction position from the integrity 10. And we're also going to swap the vials back so that the reaction can continue normally after we're done. And now back to the dehydroxylation example. Another important thing on this graph here, I don't know if you guys want to guess what is the interesting kinetic aspect of this reaction, but if no one has the answer right now, I'll just tell you. They have different starting rates, but they converge at the end. These are fully identical conditions, and the only thing I changed is the waiting period before I added the starting material to start the reaction. So there's multiple effects in place here, so this shouldn't be happening. And the reason this is happening is because there's also a deactivation step in the whole process, right? It has been reported before that this is the cycle, that different amines can deactivate osmium catalysts, and in this case the byproduct, NMM, from the oxidation here. So NMOs are oxidant in the upjohn variant, and what you get out is NMM here, and that can work as an inhibitor. So the one that has the higher rate initially here produces this NMM faster as well, so it inhibits itself basically, so that they do converge at the end. And what we figured out basically with more tests and more data is that this entire cycle has an extra step associated with it, which is that the precatalyst needs time to dissolve or oxidize. Both of these steps take some time, and it's important that you wait before you start the reaction, otherwise it will clog the HPLC. But this is not just for optimizing my HPLC method, this is more of a general concept. If you run this on an industry scale, you need to know what is happening with your catalyst, especially with your catalyst, because it's usually the most expensive part and the one that is most responsible for the rate that you want. So you definitely need to know what is happening, and we have an activation and a deactivation step here. Again, we did more tests on this, And what this allowed us to do is basically form an entire kinetic model on how the entire system works, which is really the end game of kinetics. You want to be able to predict the next conditions, you want to be able to know how the system behaves. And this is what this accelerated stress testing is all about, right? That you can find the points where it doesn't work anymore, and you can basically not optimize for them, but if you know where they are, like you need to know where they are to avoid them. It's not that we optimize towards them, but away from them, and make sure that everything's still stable. And to do this, the best case is you have a full kinetic model for this, because you can just punch in your different concentrations for your starting materials, and what it will give you is, okay, this will work, this will not work, this is the yield you can expect. And another thing it allows you to do is to make sure that the process is working as you expect every time, even if you change something. So you can just sample like 3-4 times, and if the concentrations you observe roughly match the kinetic model, you know that everything's going great and you don't have to worry about this charge. So it's also a form of process control here, just by making sure that we don't hit these points where the system dies down or the catalyst is fully deactivated, that kind of thing. And these are basically my modeling results here. Just by adding the solubility step and the deactivation step, you can see that the fit here significantly improves. And now the question is, how do you actually build these kinds of models? You need full knowledge of a modeling software, which you can either pay a lot of money for in form of DynoChem, or you can go the Copasi route, which is open source, which is what I chose, but it's really hard to set up. If you try to set up this ones, like you need to move the files in the correct position, you need to type out everything you want to know in very specific ways. And basically what I did is figure out a way here to make this a lot easier, and I put this whole thing into a GUI graphical user interface for chemists to use. And what it does is, first of all, it can just read out your mechanism from ChemDraw. You don't need to type it out. If you have it drawn, you can just drag and drop there. It will auto-populate your reactions, which is really nice. And the other thing is it just optimizes the K values for you. So just drag and drop your CSV files here, and you will tell it, tell me what are my K values, and it will find the best possible fit for you. So this is as simplistic as I could make it. Drag and drop your reaction, give it the data, hit go. And again, I hope that other people will start to use this GUI that I will publish later. I will also make my poster about this. If you feel like checking out the poster session, come by. I will talk more about that there.
One of the nice advantages of automating these kind of things is that it's fairly easy to implement them into other automated workflows. In terms of this deck, that means that we can now automatically model a certain reaction without any human intervention, which will eventually lead to automatic/autonomous mechanism generation, including site reactions, activation, deactivation processes. And these are exactly the kind of behaviors that you want to recognize with the accelerated stress testing. Right now, the HPLC run has finished, so if everything worked, we should not observe any alcohol concentration, which should in turn lead to an increase of the temperature, just so that we have a feedback implemented here. And if we scroll down here to the newest data, we can see that the integrated range is 0, and the integrity has indeed set the temperature to 40 degrees, so everything still works. So thank you all for coming, and have a nice day.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Guzman. I'm a third-year graduate student at the Hein Lab. I do reaction monitoring by NMR, and I'm focusing on palladium catalyzed coupling reactions, and I'm trying to look more into palladium speciation by this technique.
Yeah, and hi everyone, I'm Isabel, also a third-year grad student here at the Hein Lab, and I focus more on looking at the palladium catalyst speciation by online HPLC MS instead, and I also do some mechanistic elucidation work here. And so here in this room, we're going to show you a little bit of the tools we use to do reaction monitoring and the sorts of data we can acquire from these systems. And so the case study we're going to present here is on a biphasic Suzuki-Miyaruwa coupling reaction. And for this reaction, our lab developed a biphasic sampling system to attach to our DILC system for online HPLC sampling. And so these tools allow us to do things like dynamic parameter scanning. And so here what I'm showing you now is an animation of the scheme on the previous slide, which is showing how this biphasic sampling system works. And so what we have at the top left is a reaction flask containing your biphasic solution, and leading from that are two outlines, each with a different filter, which allows us to select for the phase that we want to sample. And those two lines go into a solenoid valve, which is what we use to select the phase that we want to sample, and this can be controlled by Python. And so the next module here is a VaporTech pump, which is what pumps the reaction solution through to our first valve here, first Vicky valve, which we call our sampling valve. And so on this valve we have a sample loop which takes an aliquot of the phase of the solution that is flowing through this valve. And using a push solvent of your choice, we can push that reaction aliquot on towards our second valve through a dynamic mixer. And the second valve is what we call an HPLC injection valve. And this valve is directly in line with the HPLC, and again on it we have a sample loop which takes an aliquot of the diluted reaction sample with your push solvent and delivers that directly onto the HPLC, which accomplishes our online sampling of the biphasic reaction solution. And so basically a big part of this system is basically the DILC system that is now commercially available. I'll let you have a minute to just go through the animation yourself, as that might be easier to understand in this case.
Alright, so we also monitor these reactions using flow NMR. We do this using Bruker's Insight probe, and the way it works is we only monitor the organic phase using the NMR. We're able to sample only the organic and avoid the aqueous by using an extra valve that switches when we sample the aqueous to the HPLC.
Yeah, okay, so and here what we're showing you is some of the data that we're able to obtain from the sampling system for the HPLC. So what we're seeing here is the HPLC time courses. And as you can see, we can monitor components in both the organic phase and the aqueous phase, in which we're able to detect the boronate versus the boronic acid. Through these reactions, we're also actually able to monitor some of the catalytic species that in the reaction as well. So as you can see on the slide, we can see both a Buchwald precatalyst fragment and the oxidative addition complex fragment in these reactions, and this directly helped us determine what the optimal order of addition for the reaction was to achieve optimal conversion. And so as you can see in the first case, when we add palladium last, we weren't able to get complete activation, but when we switched to adding boronic acid last to initiate the reaction, we are then able to get complete activation in the reaction, and that is reflected on the reaction conversion as well. Yeah, and so through this you can see how useful this system might be for an industrial application as well.
Alright, so what we're able to see by NMR and not the HPLC is more detail on the speciation in the boron species and our catalyst. So first, I want to point out this graph over here. It just shows the excellent agreement between LC and NMR, which give us a lot of confidence in our system setup. One of the things that we were hoping to achieve is take a better look at the X ligand in our palladium species. So from this reaction, we're expecting our oxidative addition complex, but we're also expecting to see the hydroxide, right? So we're looking at the palladium activation at first, and as you can see, before you add your water and your base, you see nothing, of course. There's not electrophilic addition. Once you add your water and base, though, we see more than one species, and we let it come to an equilibrium. And the two main species that you're observing is our oxidative addition complex and our hydroxide, of course, labeled in the blue and the brown. And once you add the boronic acid, the equilibrium shifts towards just one species, and we're able to monitor this and see it very clearly. Another thing that popped up in these reactions is that you see more than just these two species, and that's because we know that palladium 0 and palladium 2 can produce these palladium 1 dimers, and we're trying to see if we can figure out their role in catalysis, as well as other side reactions which products we're able to see via NMR and HPLC. So we're also monitoring the reaction using multiple nuclei, another advantage of using NMR. So we're monitoring also using boron, phosphorus, and of course 1H NMR besides the fluorine. And what we're able to see is, in here I'm just gonna show you what we see in the organic versus the aqueous phase when we change the catalyst loading. So if we look at the stars trend, we see that in this case we added 9.1 millimolar of catalyst, and in the circle ones we added 11.36. So by just looking at the boric acid, which is a byproduct of the transmetallation step, we see that we have agreement in product production. But if you look at the boronate, when you add more catalyst, you have less of the boronate and more of the boronic acid in the organic phase. So now we're gonna show you guys how this looks like. So we're gonna show you the actual hardware that we use. So I'm gonna ask you to please step over there and follow Isabel, who's about to show you our setup. And we're just gonna take first a look at how the HPLC monitoring works, and then we'll see how this flows into the NMR.
Yeah, so here what you can see is our reaction solution on an EasyMax reactor. And this system allows us to change the temperature, the stirring very easily, and can be remote controlled, which again is very useful for processes that we want to monitor and enables dynamic parameter scanning. And so what you can see here right now is that the reaction is actually sampling the aqueous phase through the lines. As you can see, the lines are clear through the solenoid valve, which is the aqueous phase, whereas if you look at the NMR flow cell, as you can see, the solution in there is colored, which is the organic phase. So while the aqueous phase is being sampled by the HPLC, we can still sample the organic phase by NMR. Yeah, so here we're going to do a bit of an interesting thing where we're going to switch the phase by switching the solenoid valve position. And after we switch that position, you're going to be able to see the organic phase coming through the lines again. As you can see in this NMR tube, we have it pre-filled with the aqueous solution, and now we're going to fill it with some of the organic solution. Just going to increase the flow rate on the pump a bit so that the organic phase comes through faster. So you can see the droplets are getting colored now, which means the organic phase is coming back through the circulation. And so now we're going to fill the NMR tube with the organic solution.
What you can see now is this beautiful biphasic NMR that they've made for me. And if any of you guys have ever run an NMR, you'll know that under most circumstances you would never ever ever want to run this. It's not going to give you anything useful. So what we've got is I've written a post sequence. I shouldn't take credit for this actually. This idea has been known for a while, but it's not yet particularly prevalent outside of NMR circles. But the way this works is the same way that an MRI can track different parts of your body. We can also selectively watch only this part of the tube or only this part of the tube. So that's what I'm going to show you guys right now. I'll just put the sample in the magnet and then I'm going to walk over to the computer so we can see what it looks like when it runs.
This is where I am now. So put that in the magnet, and I run a regular spectrum of it. This should take about 5 seconds or so. And what you will see is the spectrum is going to look not great. So yeah, that's what it looks like, right? The shimming is terrible. The spectrum is terrible. You're not really getting anything particularly useful out of it. But what I can then do is I'm going to set up a new experiment. And I'm going to run this guy. And what this does is it looks at the top and then it looks at the bottom. And again, this should take me about 10 seconds for the whole thing. You can see that's one up on screen now. I will point out that this is proton NMR and this is not deuterated solvent, so most of what we're going to see in these spectra is mostly just solvent. And you can see here are the 2 different SIDs that I've generated. So I can split those up in top spin, or if you open this in Mr. Nova or something, it will automatically generate a stacked spectrum of the 2 of them sitting on top of each other. So if we now look at the spectra that I've taken, we just need to phase correct that. And you can see much more nicely, we've got here our water peak that's split up into a few different phases, but we can also see down here a few other signals coming through. And again, once I phase correct that, we can see here, we can see the aromatic ring region that's starting to come in, and we can see all of this multiplicity coming in, all of which was completely lost before. So the only mild sacrifice is that we're only looking at a small slice of the NMR, so we are losing a bit of sensitivity. But on the other hand, in 10 seconds, I've now been able to sample both bits of the tube.